Now coming to the gear trains. Now what actually are the gear trains? Gear trains are the combination of gears which are used to transmit power from one shaft to other shaft. The combination of gear, when several gears are combined together in order to transmit power from one shaft to other shaft, then that particular assembly is known as the gear train. Now the very important question arises, what actually is the significance of gear train, because the pair of gear was also doing same job, it was transmitting the power from one shaft to other, then what actually is the significance of this gear train. So let us understand this thing. So the very first significance, students, is when you want to connect two shafts which are far distant apart, दो ऐसे शाफ्ट जिनके बीच में कंसिडरेबली हाई डिस्टेंस है. ओके, इन पेयर ऑफ गियर्स में जब हम पढ़ रहे थे, आई टोल्ड यू वन ऑफ द डिसएडवांटेज ऑफ पेयर ऑफ गियर दैट there has to be little center distance between the two shafts, then only you can transmit the power with the help of pair of gears. okay, but अगर मान लो कि बात दो शाफ्ट के बीच में थोड़ा डिस्टेंस ज़्यादा है, then what will do, देन एक ऑप्शन तो ये होता है डेट यू इंक्रीज द साइज ऑफ गियर्स. अगर हमको पेयर ऑफ गियर यूज करना है फॉर ट्रांसमिटिंग द पावर बिटवीन टू शाफ्ट विच आर फार डिस्टेंट अपार्ट, देन वन ऑफ द ऑप्शन कैन बी यू इंक्रीज द साइज ऑफ द गियर्स. दोनों गियर की आप साइज इंक्रीज कर दीजिए तो आपका सेंटर डिस्टेंस उसका जो है वो इंक्रीज हो जाएगा. दिस इज द फर्स्ट ऑप्शन. बट इसमें कई डिसएडवांटेजेस हैं. द वेरी फर्स्ट डिसएडवांटेज, व्हेन यू इंक्रीज द साइज, दैट मीन्स यू आर इंक्रीजिंग द रेडियस और डायमीटर ऑफ द गियर. And when you are increasing the radius of the gear, you are ultimately increasing the moment of inertia of the gear, because moment of inertia of the disc is directly proportional to r square. So obviously when you are increasing the radius, you are increasing the moment of inertia, and when you are increasing the moment of inertia, you are increasing the vibration. When you are increasing the vibration, you are ultimately increasing the amplitude of vibration, and that gear is supposed to fail very early. That means at early stage. That means the life of the gear will be less. Okay, so this is first disadvantage of using the bigger size gear, that the life of gear will decrease because the amplitude of vibration will increase. This is the first thing. Now second disadvantage is when you increase the size of the gear, ultimately the size of the assembly, whole assembly is increasing. That means it will require more space, and generally जो gears हम use करते हैं ऑटोमोबाइल्स वगैरह में यूज़ करते हैं, there we have certain limitation regarding space also. हम एक बहुत ज़्यादा स्पेस उसमें ले नहीं सकते. So when you are using just a pair of gear, और अगर gear की साइज़ आप इंक्रीज करते हैं तो अल्टीमेटली आप पूरी असेंबली की साइज़ उसमें इंक्रीज कर रहे हैं, which actually is not desirable. Okay, so this is the reason why you cannot use just the pair of gear. Instead, if you are using different gears, if you are using combination of gears, if you are using gear train, you can easily connect the two shafts which are far distant apart. That is the first thing. Second thing, when you want certain speed reduction ratio, or I should say when you want more speed reduction ratio, because in pair of gear the speed reduction ratio is limited. Okay, because ultimately what we have seen is omega 1 by omega 2 is equal to T2 by T1. So if you want to increase the speed reduction ratio, ultimately the number of teeth of the second gear has to increase, the diameter of the second gear has to increase. So ultimately the size of the gear will be increased, and I told you the disadvantage of increasing the size of gear, we cannot increase the size of gear beyond certain limit. So better would be to use the number of gears in the form of gear train. Okay, so two things I told you. The very first thing is to connect the center distance between the two shaft, to connect two different shafts which are far distant apart. That is the first thing. Second thing, when you want certain more speed reduction ratio, because in pair of gear, in one gear you can have limited speed reduction only. Okay, so when you are using combination of gear, obviously the speed reduction ratio can be increased. Now third very important thing, the reason why we are using the gear train is to get the desired direction of rotation. In pair of gears, there was one limitation, as I told you, when one of the gear is rotating clockwise, the other gear has to rotate anti-clockwise. Now what if you want to rotate the driving and driven gear in the same direction? अगर आपको driving gear और driven gear का direction अगर same चाहिए, so what you can do is you can use one intermediate gear. Okay, so here as you can see, here we are having the driving gear which is rotating clockwise, then you have got the intermediate gear which will rotate anti-clockwise, and then you have got the driven gear which is again rotating in clockwise direction. So the driving gear and the driven gear will rotate in the same direction. Getting this or not? So in order to get the desired sense of rotation of the two shafts, we can use the gear trains. Next, coming to the types of gear trains. So the very first type of gear train is the simple gear train. Okay, so in simple gear train, you have got different gears such that every gear is mounted, one shaft is having just one gear mounted there. Okay, every shaft is having just one gear and the power is getting transmitted from one shaft to other shaft. Here as you can see here, you have got 4 different gears mounted in 4 different shafts. Here we have the gear number 1 or shaft number 1, which is the driving gear, and we have got gear number 4, which is the driven gear. Okay, now you can see 2 more gear here, which is gear number 2 and gear number 3. So these 2 gear are actually called as the intermediate gears. Okay, so you have got the driver gear, you have got the driven gear, and you have got the intermediate gears. Now there is one confusion that intermediate gear, you can, most of the students call it as idle gear. Intermediate gear is not always the idle gear. उसका मैं कारण बताऊंगा. Okay, intermediate gear सिर्फ कुछ conditions में ही idle gear होते हैं, ज़रूरी नहीं है कि वो idle gear हो. अगर वो कुछ contribute नहीं कर रहे हैं अपना speed reduction ratio में, then you can call it as idle gear. Okay, but अगर वो contribute कर रहे हैं, then you can not call it as idle gear. Those will be just called as intermediate gear. Getting this? So here we are using 2 intermediate gear. Okay, now one thing you can notice here, gear 1, let's suppose, is moving in clockwise direction, gear 2 will move in anti-clockwise, gear 3 is clockwise, and gear 4 is in anti-clockwise direction. That means if we are using number of intermediate gear as even, if even number of intermediate gears are there, then the driver shaft and the driven shaft will rotate in opposite direction. Getting this? अगर number of intermediate gear even हैं, जैसे यहाँ पर हम 2 यूज़ कर रहे हैं, और if you are using 4 number of intermediate gear or 6 number of intermediate gear, so if number of intermediate gears are even, then the driver shaft और driven shaft का जो direction रहेगा in simple gear train will be opposite. Getting this or not? And if number of intermediate gear is odd, then the driver shaft and driven shaft will be having same direction. जैसा कि हमने देखा था, single intermediate gear अगर रहेगा, then obviously gear number 1, which is the driver gear, let's suppose is rotating in clockwise direction, gear 2, which is the intermediate gear, will rotate in anti-clockwise direction, and gear 3, which is the driven gear, will rotate in clockwise direction. Getting this? So very important thing, if number of intermediate gear is even, then the driver gear and the driven gear will have opposite direction, opposite sense of rotation. And if number of intermediate gear is odd, then the driver and the driven gear will have same sense of rotation. Next type of gear train is the compound gear train. Okay, now what actually are the compound gear trains? The gear trains in which more than one gears can be mounted in a single shaft, or more than one gears are mounted in the single shaft. That particular gear train is the compound gear train. Okay, so here as you can see here in the animation, you have got different gears. So the very first gear is mounted in one shaft. Then this gear number 1 is rotating gear number 2. Okay, just look at the assembly very carefully. Gear number 1 is rotating gear number 2, which is mounted in different shaft. Now gear 2 and gear 3 are mounted in the same shaft. Now what does this mean? This means कि जो gear 1 gear 2 को rotate कर रहा है, and whatever is the speed of gear 2 is rotating the shaft, और उसी shaft में gear 3 हमारा mounted है. This means that the gear 2 and gear 3 will be having same speed. Getting this? So gear 1 was the driver gear, gear 2 was the driven gear. Now let's suppose I am connecting this gear 3 with another gear in another shaft. Let's suppose gear number 4, which is in another shaft, and let this gear 3 is driving another gear number 4. So this becomes a compound gear train. Okay, why compound gear train? क्योंकि इसमें एक shaft में you can see gear 2 and gear 3, 2 gears are mounted here. Getting this? I will explain you again. So here we have one shaft with gear number 1, shaft number 2 with gear number 2 and gear number 3, and shaft number 3 with gear number 4. Gear number 1 is rotating gear number 2. Okay, gear 2 and gear 3 are in same shaft, 2 or 3 same shaft में है. That means the speed of rotation of gear 2 and gear 3 will be same. Then gear 3 is rotating gear number 4, which is on another shaft. Getting this? So this complete assembly is nothing but the compound gear train. So here you can call this gear number 1 as the driver gear, gear number 4 as the driven gear, and gear 2 and 3 are the intermediate gears. Okay. Now here as I told you, gear 1 was the driver gear, and gear 2 in the combination of gear 1 and 2, gear 1 was the driver and gear 2 was driven gear. Okay. Then in combination of 3 and 4, gear 3 was the driver gear and gear 4 was the driven gear. इसके हम analysis part में भी आएंगे, and विद दैट एनालिसिस पार्ट यू विल अंडरस्टैंड व्हाट आर आइडलर गियर्स, और इसमें कौन कौन से गियर्स जो है वो आइडलर गियर रहेंगे इसमें भी और सिंपल गियर ट्रेन में भी, बिकॉज एज आई टोल्ड यू ऑल इंटरमीडिएट गियर्स आर नॉट द आइडलर्स. Okay, only those intermediate gears which are not contributing in the speed ratio are the idlers. Getting this? So this is nothing but the compound gear train. Now this simple gear train, this compound gear train, they the application, if I tell you, they are used in the automobiles. Automobile में जो gear box रहते हैं, they use this gear trains. Another example is the heavy duty press, जो mechanical press होती है, those presses uses this gear trains. Another example, if you want to see, you can see the gearbox of the lathe machine, that also uses this gear trains. Okay, so these are all the applications of this simple gear train and compound gear train. So the next type of gear train is the reverted gear train. This reverted gear trains are actually special case of compound gear train. ये compound gear train का ही special case है, in which the input shaft and output shaft, the axis of the input shaft and output shaft coincides. That means जो input shaft की axis है और जो output shaft की axis है, दोनों की axis जो रहती है वो same रहती है. That is nothing but the reverted gear train. Compound gear train में ही अगर हम input और output shaft की axis same कर दें, it becomes a reverted gear train. For example, in watches, in clocks में watches में जो gear train use होती है, that is reverted gear train, क्योंकि second का जो कांटा घूमता है, okay, that is rotating one gear, वो एक gear उससे rotate होता है, then उससे minute का कांटा connected रहता है, and obviously the axis of the second and minute का जो कांटा है उन दोनों की एक्सिस जो है वो that has to coincide. So there we use this particular reverted gear train. Getting this or not? Okay, so here as you can see in this reverted gear train, gear 1 is the driver gear. Okay, then this gear 1 is rotating gear 2. Getting this? Now gear 2 and gear 3 are mounted in the same shaft. So the whatever is the speed of gear 2, same will be the speed of gear 3. 2 और 3 की स्पीड जो रहेगी वो सेम रहेगी. Getting this? Now you can see gear number 4. Now the axis of this gear number 4 and the axis of gear number 1 is same. दोनों की axis जो है वो same रहेगी. तो ये एक तरह से compound gear train ही हो गई. But because the axis input और output shaft की axis क्योंकि same है, then उसको हमने एक special अलग से name दे दिया, and that is nothing but the reverted gear train. Getting this or not? And application, as I told you, it is used in clocks, in watches, wherever we want that the input and output shafts axis should coincide, should lie in the same line, input axis and output axis, then we can use this particular reverted gear train. Next is the epicyclic gear train, or you can also call it as planetary gear train. Now what is epicyclic gear train? Epi का मतलब होता है, epi means axis, and epicyclic का मतलब होता है when that axis is rotating about another axis, then that becomes the epicyclic. So in this particular gear train, as you can see here, okay, and this particular gear train is also called as the planetary gear train. अब ये planetary क्यों बोलते हैं ये भी यहाँ से समझ में आ जाएगा. Here you have got the sun gear, और जैसे कि planet अपनी axis में भी revolve करते हैं and they revolve round the sun also, in the similar way here we have got the planet gear which is rotating about its own axis and also rotating about the sun gear. Getting this now? Okay, so this is the reason why this is called as the epicyclic gear train. भी इसी कारण बोल रहे हैं. Why? Because ये जो planet gear हमको दिख रहा है, इस planet gear की जो axis है, that axis is, एक तो वो planet gear अपनी axis के about भी rotate कर रहा है, and that axis of planet gear, the axis of planet gear is also rotating about the sun's axis, sun gear's axis. Getting this not? So this is known as the epicyclic gear train, or you can also call it as planetary gear train. Now in order that the planet gear should rotate about the sun gear, यहाँ पर एक और डिवाइस की हमको ज़रूरत पड़ेगी, and that particular device is known as arm. Okay, अभी तक जो हमने gear trains देखा, in simple gear train, reverted gear train, compound gear train, there तीन component हमारे पास थे. First was the driver gear, second was the driven gear, and third was the intermediate gear. But यहाँ एक और component introduce हो रहा है, and that is arm. Okay, और ये arm की ही मदद से ये possible हो पाया है that एक गियर जो है, एक प्लेनेट गियर जो है वो सन गियर के अराउंड जो है वो रोटेट कर पा रहा है. गेटिंग दिस नाउ? ओके, अब ये आर्म का सिग्निफिकेंस क्या है, लेट अस अंडरस्टैंड. लेट सपोज इनिशियली दिस आर्म इज एट रेस्ट. ओके, लेट सपोज ये आर्म रोटेट नहीं कर रहा है, then you can see in this particular animation the sun gear is rotating and correspondingly the planet gear is also rotating. So this has become the simple gear train. ये सिंपल पेयर ऑफ गियर बन गया. ओके, और यहाँ पर से अगर मुझे स्पीड रेशियो चाहिए, NP by NS, N of planet divided by n of sun, speed of planet by speed of sun will be equal to number of teeth on sun gear divided by number of teeth on planet gear. Simple thing. Getting this on? Okay. So this has become the simple gear train. Now what if I am rotating the arm also? अब इस चीज़ को ध्यान से समझना. अभी तक तो ये सिंपल गियर ट्रेन था. अब मैं अगर आर्म को सपोज रोटेशन देता हूँ तो वो जो आर्म का नंबर ऑफ रोटेशन है that will add in the number of rotation of sun gear. First thing, क्योंकि आर्म को मैंने एक्स्ट्रा रोटेशन दिया, सन गियर वॉज रोटेटिंग एट इट्स ओन स्पीड विच वॉज ns. उसके अलावा मैंने एक और स्पीड उसको दे दी आर्म को, बिकॉज आर्म इज कनेक्टेड टू बोथ सन एंड प्लेनेट. तो आर्म का जो एक्स्ट्रा रोटेशन है डेट विल एड ऑन टू द स्पीड ऑफ सन गियर. फर्स्ट थिंग. सेकेंड थिंग, डेट आर्म का जो रोटेशन है वो प्लेनेट गियर की स्पीड में भी एड ऑन हो जाएगा. गेटिंग दिस नॉट? ओके. सो दिस इज वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. जब आर्म को अगर मैं रोटेट कर रहा हूँ, इनिशियली व्हेन आर्म वाज फिक्स्ड दिस वाज अ सिंपल गियर ट्रेन. सिंपल गियर था, एक गियर सन गियर जो है वो ड्राइविंग गियर था, प्लेनेट गियर जो है वो ड्रिवन गियर था, सन गियर वाज रोटेटिंग द प्लेनेट गियर. दिस वाज अ सिंपल गियर ट्रेन. But when I am introducing the arm and I am giving certain speed to the arm, and because that arm is connected to both sun and planet, दोनों sun और planet दोनों से arm connected है, then obviously the speed of the arm will add on to the speed of sun gear as well as to the speed of planet gear. This is very very important. So you can see in this animation, when I am rotating the arm, that arm speed is also adding on to the sun's gear speed as well as the planet gear speed. So this is nothing but the planetary gear train, इसलिए इसको planetary gear train बोला जाता है, और you can also call it as epicyclic gear train. Okay. Now another इसी का एक और भाई है you can call, and that is called as a hypocycloid gear train. Okay. Hypocycloid gear train means here you will be having one ring gear. ओके, एंड वन गियर. एपिसाइकल मतलब क्या होता है? व्हेन एक सर्कल दूसरी सर्कल के ऊपर रोटेट करता है या एक एक्सिस दूसरे एक्सिस के अबाउट रोटेट करती है, दैट वाज नोन एज द एपिसाइकल. ओके. हाइपरसाइक्लॉइड किसको बोलते हैं हम? जब सर्कल के अंदर एक सर्कल रोटेट करे. जब सर्कल के ऊपर रोटेट करता है तो उसको हम एपिसाइकल बोलते हैं. सर्कल के अंदर कोई सर्कल रोटेट करता है, इसको हम हाइपोसाइक्लॉइड बोलते हैं. Now let's suppose in this epicycloid gear train or planetary gear train, here we were having the sun gear and the planet gear. Now let's suppose एक और gear मैं इसमें introduce कर रहा हूँ, that is the ring gear. Okay, so here you can see the outer gear, you can see here is the ring gear. Now what will happen if I am rotating the ring gear? Now let us look into the direction of the sun gear, planet gear and the ring gear. So the sun gear, let's suppose, is moving in clockwise direction. So obviously because the planet gear is directly connected to the sun gear, it will rotate in anti-clockwise direction. Getting this now? But what about the ring gear? So the planet gear and ring gear जो है वो internally connected है, ना कि externally. Okay, internal टिप्स है ring में. So as you can see in the animation also, the planet gear and the ring gear will have same direction of rotation and not the different direction of rotation. Getting this one? Okay, so however here there were three different gears, but still जो gear 1 का जो rotation है, गियर 1 के रोटेशन का जो डायरेक्शन है और रिंग गियर के रोटेशन का जो डायरेक्शन है, डेट विल बी डिफरेंट. ओके. क्यों? क्योंकि प्लैनेट गियर और रिंग गियर जो है वो आपस में इंटरनली कनेक्टेड है, ना कि एक्सटर्नली. एंड वेन एवर इट इज कनेक्टेड इंटरनली, द डायरेक्शन ऑफ द टू गियर्स विल बी सेम. सो सन गियर व्हेन रोटेट क्लॉकवाइज, दिस प्लैनेट गियर विल रोटेट एंटी क्लॉकवाइज, एंड द रिंग गियर will also rotate in the direction of planet gear, that is in anti-clockwise direction. Getting this now? So this is nothing but the epicyclic gear train.